believe they have the answer to this mystery. The implications for the world are enormous.
We're talking about millions of lives here.
Million of lives and million of deaths.
In this part of rural Zambia, a group of people are about to defy hundreds of years of tribal custom because of fear and what seems like superstition. Kahilo Sebeso is 8 years old, and he is about to enter the Mukonda, the sacred circumcision ground of the Luvali tribe. Yet Kahilo is not Luvali, he is Lozi, and the Lozi have never been circumcised.
Nisha kakuli fa seni bule lakse. Alu anibone kuli utata bo. Sina kama tukwa edisi.
In other parts of Africa, people believe that burning the hide of an ox or sleeping with a virgin can cure them of AIDS. Circumcision will save their children. The question is, are they right? Can some...
This epidemic has no precedent in history. I mean, no other disease has the potential to ruin a society in terms of socio-economic impact, in terms of mortality, infant mortality. We are back 50 years ago. So this epidemic cannot be compared to anything else. I mean, for societies in Southern and East Africa, this is an incredible tragedy.
On a global scale, close to 60 million people have either have HIV or have died of HIV. And that is similar to the number of people that, both military and civilian, that died during World War II, which is the greatest catastrophe in human history.
Today in Africa, there is a very real need to find something, anything, to slow down the spread of a disease that is devastating whole communities. Joseph Aduko, the latest in his family to get the disease.
Here I buried my wife. He died from 1996. Okay. And this is my second son. He died when he's having 27 years. He died on 3rd, and I buried him on 7th. So he passed away. My wife died because of AIDS, and my son died because of AIDS. And even my brother, my elder brother, died because of AIDS. So totally, I've buried 6 of them because of that.
Most scientists agree that a vaccine against HIV is at best years away. If everyone used a condom, this could stop the disease in its tracks. But even if condoms were generally available, only a minority seems prepared to use them. It means that in Africa, AIDS is spiraling out of control.
Karobange, usipenda moko mang'eny, biro ga. Neno kata samoro wan kodi kama to bang' higa achiel kiseyudo gino to dendi gore. Chako diewo to chako ng'ok to then that is the end. Mane kaka itho.
And yet at the heart of this epidemic, there is a bizarre anomaly. For no rate, and the people on the other, 7%. It is a pattern repeated throughout Africa, dramatic disparities in rates of HIV infection. If scientists could understand what caused some people to be more at risk than others, then it might help them slow down the spread of this deadly disease. But for years, the cause of the disparity remained a mystery. In 1985, anthropologist Priscilla Reining was working with the Haya tribe in Tanzania near Lake Victoria. It was the beginning of the AIDS epidemic, and Reining wondered why the Haya were being hit so hard.
Why should the Haya have relatively high AIDS rates and other people, other groups of people in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, not reporting any at all? And so, why is this? Why are the Haya clobbered by AIDS? And that was a question that I really had in my mind, and had it for years, I mean, for quite some long period of time.
Before there was a final answer to this question, it would take 15 years of hard work by a small group of determined scientists fighting against a skeptical majority. It was a question that had an unexpected answer, one that could have profound implications for millions of people. While Reining was working with the Haya, in Nairobi, a group of researchers was also trying to understand AIDS. It was 1985. The epidemic was in the early stages, and they had little idea how the virus was being spread.
Well, we were trying to understand if ordinary bacterial sexually transmitted diseases promoted HIV transmission, and to identify other risk factors for acquisition of HIV by men, like frequent sex with prostitutes, or tattooing, or injections, or blood transfusions, those kinds of things. We were working with a group of prostitutes in Nairobi, of whom about 80% were HIV infected. So if somebody had sex with them that was unprotected, they would have a very high chance of being exposed to HIV. So you could assume that any man that's had sex there would have had a sexual exposure to HIV.
Plummer wanted to know which of the men who had been exposed to HIV through prostitutes would actually get the virus, and what was the key factor that made these men more at risk than others.
And, well, how do you find those men? Well, a high proportion of those men get other sexually transmitted disease, like gonorrhea, or chancroid, or herpes, or whatever, and they show up at a clinic for treatment.
Plummer found 300 of these men in this Nairobi clinic. They had been exposed to HIV through prostitutes, but hadn't yet been infected. Over the course of a year, they were tested repeatedly for HIV to see whether they would get infected with the virus, and why. This is an ELISA HIV test. If the blood plasma turns blue, then it contains the virus. In the following year, 24 of the 300 men were infected with HIV. But why were these 24 more at risk than the others? Plummer felt that he had found the answer.
We found three associations, three things that were more frequent in HIV-positive men than in HIV-negative men. That was what past history of sexually transmitted diseases, particularly diseases that cause ulcers, frequent sex with prostitutes, and being uncircumcised. Men who are uncircumcised had about a 4 to 5-fold increase in likelihood of being HIV positive.
At the time, it seemed extraordinary. Why should it be that just because a man was uncircumcised, he should be more at risk from HIV and AIDS? Everyone had expected men with sexually transmitted diseases to be more easily infected, as HIV can pass more readily into the body through open sores like ulcers. But no one had even considered circumcision, except the prostitutes themselves. This is the same Majengo slum where Plummer did his study. And this is Salome, one of Majengo's 2,000 prostitutes.
Yule aliyotairiwa ni sawa, anaweza kupata magonjwa, lakini sana sana yule hajatairiwa anapata magonjwa kuliko huyu aliyotairiwa.
Kwa nini ukifikiria?
Kwa sababu kama hii ngozi yake inaficha magonjwa mbalimbali. Sawa, huwezi kujua mtu yuko namna gani, na yule aliyotairiwa ana magonjwa, lakini sana sana ukija kuangalia yule hajatairiwa ni mbaya sana kuliko yule ametairiwa.
It seemed like simple biology. Foreskins can trap the bacteria that cause sexually transmitted diseases, and the STDs make it easier for HIV to get into the body. But it turned out that wasn't the whole story at all. In the data, there was another, more dramatic finding, something that Plummer couldn't explain. Even without ulcers, uncircumcised men were still 8 times more likely to get HIV. Having a foreskin alone seemed to increase their chance of getting the virus.
I remember picking up a sheaf of computer paper from the statistician and flipping through pages and pages of these results and coming across this and being very excited about it. Getting on the phone and calling my colleague and saying, hey, look what we found.
Despite Plummer's enthusiasm, when his paper was published, it was met with enormous skepticism. After all, it was only one study, and a small one at that. Scientists were focused on condom use and vaccines as ways to stop AIDS. Few wanted to listen to a controversial new theory. But to one person, Plummer's work made perfect sense. The anthropologist Priscilla Reining had long wondered why the Haya were suffering so much from AIDS, while tribes nearby were much less affected. Then she heard about Plummer's study on circumcision.
Wow. You know, for me it was really an explanation. You know, I understood, which I hadn't at all. I mean, it never would have occurred to me that this was a factor. But when I heard it, I knew that quote-unquote, had to be important.
No one had made this connection before. But as an anthropologist, Reining recognized its importance. She knew that in Africa, tribes were divided into the circumcised and uncircumcised, and that this was a powerful and sacred part of their identity.
They witness the most important ceremony in a Maasai's life. This is the day of circumcision. The day a boy becomes a warrior.
Reining wanted to see if there was a widespread correlation between circumcision and HIV. If there was, it might shed light on the mystery of different infection rates. She started with circumcision data from tribes across Africa and an ethnographic map.
Here's a working copy of the one that, in fact, we used. The Haya live here, immediately west of Lake Victoria. They're easy to find on any scale map because the lake is such a prominent feature. The Kikuyu live in Kenya, so I could look up Haya in the ethnographic atlas and go to the right column and go down and see that they did not circumcise. This sort of verified for me. Then I can look at Kikuyu and see, yes, they were circumcised. They did practice circumcision.
Reining compiled the circumcision data of hundreds of circumcised and uncircumcised tribes. Then this data was placed on a map of Africa, its epidemic. In theory, the people living on one side of this valley are more likely to die from AIDS because the men are uncircumcised. But few scientists could see a biological reason why the foreskin could be responsible for so many deaths. So in 1989, most believed that circumcision couldn't be the cause after all, that there must be other reasons. And in any case, it seemed that Reining's study was too simplistic to draw a firm conclusion.
The major problem with an ecological study is that there may be many other differences between those populations that could account for the differences in the rate of disease. So to take a very simple example, if you constructed a map showing the number of televisions per head of population against the rate of HIV, you might conclude that television was a protective, had a protective effect against HIV, because televisions are very common in the West and HIV is very common in Africa, where televisions are rare. Now that is demonstrably absurd, and the situation with circumcision was rather similar.
Hayes thought that just because a map of uncircumcised tribes matched high HIV rates, it didn't prove that one caused the other. There could always be another explanation. There was another blow to the circumcision theory when in 1989 Hayes and a team of researchers tested and questioned circumcised and uncircumcised men in Tanzania. The results of their survey seemed to directly contradict Plummer and Reining's work.
The work that we'd done ourselves in Tanzania, in some population-based studies there, didn't seem to show any protective effect. In fact, if anything, the circumcised men in the populations we were studying seemed to have a higher rate of HIV. So we felt at that stage that the evidence concerning this was very inconsistent.
Now, some of the Lozi tribe in northwest Zambia see from their own experience that because they are uncircumcised, they suffer more from AIDS. And some Lozi fathers are defying tradition to bring their sons to circumcisers in another tribe.
2 years ago they were coming at least, but numbers were a bit low. Now this year they are coming in at a large number.
Why do you think that is? Why are they coming here?
Because they are worried about AIDS. AIDS, and AIDS is all over. That's one most important fact I can give you, AIDS.
The parents of these children are convinced that circumcision can protect their sons from AIDS. But there could never be a public policy of encouraging circumcision unless this belief could be substantiated. Now, scientists are beginning to piece together the biological reasons why a foreskin might make you vulnerable to the HIV virus. When AIDS first took hold in the West in the mid-1980s, scientists had no idea how the disease passed from person to person. Then they discovered that homosexual men could be infected as the HIV virus passed through the delicate skin of the anus. And they also found that the virus could penetrate the equally thin mucosal surface of the vagina. And they worked out how this was possible. The virus gets in where the skin isn't protected by keratin. This is a cross-section of human skin, the dermis, and the epidermal layer of cells above. And on the surface layer, a protein called keratin forms a thick, protective coating. If this keratin layer is intact, it is almost impossible for viruses to get into the body. And there are very few places on the body that are not covered in keratin.
Well, keratin is a thick layer which is impervious to microorganisms. And this is one of the reasons why, despite what people think, skin does not get very commonly infected. Unlike mucosa, such as the nasal tract, the lungs, genitourinary tract, which gets much more commonly infected. In fact, most infections are upper respiratory or genitals.
Even though scientists knew how the virus could be transmitted between homosexual men and from men to women, astonishingly, no one had looked at how the virus could pass from women to men through the penis, and no one knew which part of the penis lacked keratin and was vulnerable to HIV. Could the virus enter through the shaft of the penis, or through the head or glands? Or could HIV get through the foreskin? To find out, scientists had to identify where there was the least amount of keratin. Last year in Australia, a team of scientists decided to check a textbook theory to see where the keratin was missing on the penis.
Well, it's difficult to believe this, but a couple of years ago, if you looked in the textbooks to see what was known about the difference in appearance of a circumcised versus an uncircumcised penis, there was almost no information. And the first thing we decided to do was to look at the glans penis, this part of the penis, to take serial sections through the inner part of the penis and compare circumcised and uncircumcised men. And I was convinced that following circumcision, since you've got more sort of trauma and abrasion to the tip of the penis, that the glans gets thicker and more keratinized, and that's why the virus doesn't get in.
The theory was that because the head of an uncircumcised penis is protected by the foreskin, it doesn't develop a thick layer of keratin, letting HIV in more easily than a circumcised penis. This is a cross-section from the glans of a circumcised penis. The lighter layer is keratin on the surface of the skin. Short's team counted the cells that make up the keratin layer, and then the layer of keratin on the glans of an uncircumcised penis. According to the textbooks, the keratin here should have been much thinner, but they were exactly the same thickness.
There's no difference in the appearance of the glans or the amount of keratin on it as between circumcised and uncircumcised men. So we scratched our heads and thought, gosh, that wasn't what we expected. What could be the possible alternative? And incredibly slowly we came to the obvious conclusion that we should really be looking at the foreskin itself, not at the glans.
This is a cross-section of the skin on the inner mucosal surface of the foreskin. It has far less keratin. Short realized this part of the penis was completely different from any other.
The inside of the foreskin has got much less keratin on it, and so is likely to be the site of viral entry into the body. And in addition, it's got all these amazing cells called Langerhans cells.
And to reach out to the HIV virus, and there are more of them.
We have found a larger number of Langerhans cells in the foreskin. Therefore, the chance of the foreskin being infected is so much greater. Therefore, it fits the bill.
Even though these biologists had shown in theory that the foreskin might be the most likely entry point for HIV, no one had done the definitive experiment to infect a living foreskin with HIV to see if it really was more susceptible to the virus. Meanwhile, the evidence was building up in Africa too. A 5-year survey of Mombasa truck drivers showed yet again that men were 4 times more likely to get HIV if they were uncircumcised. Other studies from across Africa confirmed this. In Uganda, for example, there was the astonishing statistic that none of 50 circumcised men living with HIV-positive women got the virus. But one of the most important pieces of evidence was still missing. In an operating theater in Chicago, an adult male is being circumcised. The foreskin will be used for a unique experiment. For the first time, the human foreskin is going to be exposed to HIV under laboratory conditions. By putting the foreskin in culture, viral pathologist Bruce Patterson can keep it alive and so try to mimic how it would react if it were still attached to a human body. To keep it alive, the tissue has to be treated in a lab across town within 45 minutes.
What we're going to do is take a biopsy from the mucosal surface and a biopsy from the external surface. The external surface having more keratin, but we really feel that the mucosal surface is most susceptible because of its relative lack of keratin. This tissue, mind you, is fresh and is still living, and we hope to get it in culture in time to continue living.
Patterson's theory is that cells in the inner surface of the foreskin will be infected by the virus, and cells on the outer surface will not, because they are covered with a thicker layer of keratin. For the first time, HIV is being dripped onto a living foreskin. Within minutes, it can infect individual cells. To see where the virus has got in, the foreskin is sliced 0.5 millimeter thin to reveal the individual cells. Among the millions of cells in this cross-section, Patterson has to find which ones have been attacked by HIV. To find out if the cells are infected, Patterson dyes the Langerhans cells with a green marker and then a different marker for the HIV.
Next, we will add the fluorescent HIV tag that we developed that'll bind directly to the HIV virus.
If HIV infects the Langerhans cells, their color will change from green to yellow. The results were remarkable.
The most dramatic findings is the ease with which foreskin is infectable and the extent to which it's infected. We see many infected Langerhans cells.
This is a picture of the inner surface of the foreskin. With less keratin to protect it, the HIV virus has penetrated not just Langerhans cells, but 2 other types of immune cell. And this is the outer keratinized surface with no sign of infected cells. Patterson has yet to analyze the data in detail, but feels there could be important implications.
The potential is that if this is a primary tissue involved in the transmission of HIV, and we are capable of removing it, then we should remove it in an effort to prevent the spread of HIV.
Yet despite this evidence, circumcised men are still at risk. The virus can still get into a circumcised penis through any small cut, or in ways that scientists have yet to understand. So removing a foreskin will not fully protect a man from HIV. Only a condom can do that. Yet Patterson's work seems to support the earlier studies. Men appear to be far more likely to get HIV if they are uncircumcised.
When you talk about circumcision, you are changing people's culture, people's customs. The customs give us identity. And we don't, just as Council of Elders, we are the custodians of Luo norms and values. We are the custodians of Luo customs which have evolved over the years. For us to think in terms of possibilities of changing anything, the Luo elders must come together, and they must have a good reason why this needs to be changed.
The doubts of tribal elders in Africa are echoed by a powerful international anti-circumcision lobby based in the United States. For organizations like NoCirc, even if the science was absolutely convincing, circumcision is seen as mutilation and a violation of human rights.
And I'm concerned now that governments are going to get involved to encourage a practice which significantly alters male genitalia for the life of the individual on the basis of correlational data, which should never be used for any action. It should only be used to suggest further research at the very best.
It could be disastrous consequences.
Subjecting African males to this is a crime against humanity, will become a crime against humanity.
We're talking about another Holocaust. Yes. A scientifically sanctioned Holocaust against African males.
Yeah.
Circumcision is a very emotive issue. The debate is not dispassionate, is not rational, it's not based on scientific evidence, it's based on other things, which I think makes doing the right thing a lot more difficult. It also makes people hesitant to do studies and to make decisions because they know that there's going to be problems and people don't like to get into controversy.
We would like to see real solutions to the AIDS epidemic. We would like to see the scientists who are spending time with the science turn their attention to real solutions. We feel that this is a distraction from seeking real solutions, real cures to AIDS.
While skepticism continued, in Africa, another population study was underway, focusing on the town of Kisumu. The Luo people of Kisumu have been hit hard by AIDS. Today, a quarter of the town's population have the virus. 2 years ago, a team of researchers set out to answer the same question yet again. To see why so many people in Kisumu should have HIV, when many fewer were infected in certain other cities in Africa. But this time they didn't anticipate that circumcision could be the answer. The authors instead decided to turn the focus of the study on other factors. Above all, they thought that more Luo could be infected because their culture encouraged riskier sexual behavior.
We looked at various factors that may explain the very high prevalence in Kisumu. We look at age at first sex, at condom use, at other STDs, at religion, socioeconomic factors.
After questioning 1,000 men in each city, they found that sexual behavior was remarkably similar and couldn't explain why infection rates varied so much. In fact, by far the most important factor yet again was circumcision. There seemed to be little difference between the cities, except that in Kisumu, Luo men were uncircumcised.
We found in Kisumu, uncircumcised male have a HIV prevalence of about 21–22%, and circumcised males have about 7% of HIV prevalence. So you have a three times increase in HIV prevalence due to lack of circumcision.
So there is a huge difference between circumcised and non-circumcised. But for sure, we have looked also at the many other factors that may play a role in this difference, in this discrepancy, looking at religion, age at circumcision. And when you take into account all these factors, probably the difference is less great, but still there is a huge difference between the two populations.
The same Luo people that live in Kisumu also live on one side of this valley. On the other side are the Luya. Finally, scientists believe they may be able to explain why these people living just yards apart are suffering from AIDS in such a dramatically different way. The Luya are circumcised, and the Luo are not. In the end, it was not this study alone, but the weight of evidence from all over Africa that supported the circumcision theory. If a study falls on the left of the line, it shows that circumcision reduces the chances of getting HIV. But the final enigma were the studies on the right. These showed that circumcision could actually increase HIV rates, and they included Richard Hayes' own early study in Tanzania.
We had found in our studies in rural Tanzania that, in fact, if anything, circumcised men seem to have a higher rate of HIV, and this was one of the reasons I was very skeptical about this alleged protective effect.
Given the strength of evidence, Hayes went back to the data, this time using adjusted figures that could filter out distorting factors like religion. By dividing all the men from one religion into circumcised and uncircumcised, then if more uncircumcised men had HIV, he could be sure that circumcision was having an independent effect on HIV rates.
And what we found when we did that very careful analysis was that from finding a higher rate of HIV in circumcised men, we now found that on a fully adjusted analysis, the circumcised men were actually at a lower risk of HIV.
This year, Hayes pulled together all the statistical studies from 15 years in a meta-analysis. And he found that by using adjusted figures, these studies now supported the circumcision theory. Finally, the skeptic was convinced.
And of the 28, you can see here the 15 studies where an adjusted analysis had been done. And indeed, all 15 of these studies found a protective effect. And combining their results together, we estimate that overall, the data suggests that circumcision reduces the risk of HIV by something like 60%.
This year in Durban, 11,000 experts from around the world came together to talk about AIDS. With the prospect of a successful vaccine still years away, and with limited condom use failing to control the spread of the disease, for the first time people were taking circumcision seriously.
We explored sexual behavior, prevalence of other sexually transmitted infections, and male circumcision as factors that could explain the differences in HIV spread between the 4 cities.
There is a growing acceptance among scientists that there is a correlation between lack of circumcision and AIDS. Even the World Health Organization and the United Nations are considering the implications. And now, for the first time in Africa, the idea is being translated into a trial. In Western Kenya, Tom Onyango has the job of promoting circumcision. And that means offering safe circumcision and also spreading the word to the children of Siaya district.
What are some of the benefits of removing the foreskin? It keeps it clean. What else?
It makes condom use easier.
Onyango believes that if circumcision could be made culturally acceptable and safe, it could cut the rate of infection for men, and therefore women as well.
Another one, the decision is yours.
And he sees it as a useful backup to the government's policy of encouraging condom use, which could be effective, but is not proving popular.
Acts now to
prevent STDs and AIDS.
Thank you very much.
Well, I think because of the rumors about condom, people believe some condoms are laced with HIV virus, some have got holes, they easily burst, and we've been talking to them against these rumors. But people change slowly. But we believe male circumcision is one of the strategies we can sell to our people.
Tom Onyango's problem is that for circumcision to be accepted, there must be a big change in African culture. For among Luo elders, there is a belief that any policy of circumcision could be a serious threat to tribal identity.
We are not going to tell the Luo that now it must be your custom to circumcise. Supposing we got into circumcision now, and by God's providence, somebody came up with a vaccine or with the treatment, are we going to reverse?
But whether the circumcision trial in Kenya works depends on whether the young men of uncircumcised tribes are persuaded by their elders or not. Shadrach Abayo is facing that choice.
Generally,
joluo ne itero ni gine ni igolo ga mana lakgi, but kanyocha ne wagomba kata gi jodongo gi to iyudo ni ne kara gin be gidhiga nyango yo mariek, yore kaka mag sijui chodo ler moro kanyo go koko tuoro gini locally.
You are the experts about the male circumcision. You are representing the other youths who are not here with us today.
Shadrach Abayo is not alone. Professor Robert Bailey has interviewed more than 800 young Luo men, and among the majority there is a familiar refrain.
We feel that there's a very high level of acceptability of circumcision. In fact, in all our discussions with people, they lament the lack of services available to them. And they see it really as a human rights issue. They say, well, you know, why aren't we able to make informed choices?
There certainly need to be decisions that are made among the group and not somebody outside saying, you got to do it or don't do it. I mean, either way, that's not an external decision.
Ultimately, it is Shadrach's father and uncles who have the final say, and now they too are persuaded.
According to what I hear, according to what I've been told, I come to realize I must save my people for this problem which is come. And I have so accepted my boy to be circumcised. If I leave the Luo tradition, that one end there. But I have to save my people.
At Tom Onyango's new clinic, Shadrach Abayo is being offered a safe operation and counselling. There is a real worry that if circumcision is offered to millions, men will think themselves invulnerable and abandon any notion of safe sex and condom use.
It is a real danger to promote circumcision as a cure-all for preventing HIV infection. It should never be installed as a standalone intervention. We should not be telling young men that if they become circumcised, that they are then free of ever becoming infected by HIV/AIDS. We know that men who are circumcised get infected with HIV.
Certainly, in addition to condom promotion, STD treatment, potentially circumcision may have a huge impact on the number of new infections. There is no doubt.
In South Africa, the epidemic in some places among women aged 24 reached 67% today. I really think that if all males were circumcised in Africa, the epidemic couldn't go much higher than 10 to 15%.
So we're talking about millions of lives here.
Million of lives and million of deaths.
Whatever the experts decide in the future, in the meantime, some young